Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. This week I want to talk about emergent character arcs, player character arcs as it would be. And this kind of came to mind because a couple things here. I was part of a podcast, Cerebrivore. If it's available, I'll put a link, or I'll eventually put a link in the description. And we were talking about Conan, and there were some statements made about how Conan never changes. But I also just finished reading a book called Destry Rides Again. It's a Western. And in that story, the character has a very large character arc, and both of these are short stories. Well, Conan is part of a bunch of short stories. And it made me think it's not because it's a short story that the character can't have an arc, it's just how things are written. And of course, like all things, it made me think of gaming and some examples of character arcs that I've seen in campaigns I've run and played in. Also, it made me think about the idea of how we can do this in a really fun way in our games without it feeling so forced. So I'm calling it emergent character arcs or player character arcs, and let's talk about it. Components. So in order for this to work in my mind, there's basically three components. One is that it can't be planned. That is to say, it can't be, you discuss it before the campaign starts. The second part is that it needs to be emergent, just like emergent adventures. In other words, it has to be connected to what's happened in the world based on the player character's actions. And then finally, it's got to be diegetic, which basically means it has to make sense in the world, right? It has to be in-world reasons, not necessarily player reasons. So I'll quickly cover that last part in an example of how it wouldn't be. I was playing in a campaign a while back, and one of the players made kind of a outcasty kind of player character, and the rest of us didn't. And it was a very social game, and we were, interacting a bunch. And clearly the player realized after several sessions that it wasn't as much fun for them because their character was outside the game. So they kind of changed their character and made them more social, changed the way they acted. And that's fine, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's you realizing your player character doesn't fit in and you changing it, not an emergent character arc. So first I'm going to talk about the three components, and then I'm going to talk about three examples of what I think were successful emergent story arcs. So let's get to it. Can't be planned. You can have a lot of fun with creating a character, especially in a story game, where they have an arc that's going to happen. I'm starting here, we're going to find out this is going to happen, and this is the end result. Even if the stuff in the middle shifts and stuff, so it's still emergent play, ultimately, those plot points will be hit. I will start here, I will discover this, and you can have this happen a lot of times when you create this in your backstory. You might write in your backstory, I'm the heir to this throne, but my brother, thinks that I'm dead because he tried to have me killed so they could be the heir. We know the Duke's against me, and you can kind of put this all in your backstory and then let the GM and you work together to have it happen. This wouldn't qualify as being emergent because you planned it out ahead of time. It needs to be something that happens because of things that happen in the game. That is, it needs to be emergent. Emergent. So you've probably heard me talk about it before on this channel, emergent adventure, emergent story. And basically what that means is that as you're playing, the story, as it would be, or the plot, is unraveling in front of you. Neither the players nor the GM knows exactly what will happen. That doesn't mean that the GM doesn't have plans. It doesn't mean the players don't have plans. But what it does mean is the world reacts to what happens and goes in the direction that makes the most sense, and the story comes at the end. When you're sitting around the campfire going, wow, we barely escaped from that bandit camp. Who would have known, that was over there? Why did we leave the path? Oh, right, because we ran out of water because that earlier encounter made our water go bad. This is emergent story. This is emergent plot. It's not necessarily something that was planned ahead of time. Now everybody's kind of moving around the board. This is what you get in sandbox type play. It's harder to do in linear adventure paths because you're always going to kind of have this step forward, but you still get bits and pieces of it. The emergent story is the story that comes out in play. In order for us to have an emergent character arc, it needs to come out in play. So via something that goes on in the world, the character changes from where they started to where they are now. And when I say change, I mean generally changed in attitude. And almost always would also include the player changing. So it's kind of on both sides. Diegetic. And to that end, it needs to be diegetic. So the example I gave earlier is a perfect example of the player wanting to change their character because they weren't enjoying it, but it didn't necessarily make sense in the world for them to suddenly have this change of heart. You could work it into it, I guess, and you could talk to the GM about it if you want to do that and make it feel more diegetic. But if you do that and you're talking with the GM and planning it, then you are not checking the first box off. So if you change your character's motivation, if their arc happens because you as a player want it to change and not because of something that happened in the world, and especially if it doesn't make sense in the world necessarily, that doesn't fall into this category. To have this kind of character arc that I'm talking about, it needs to fulfill all three of those things. So now I'm going to jump into a couple stories and let's see what I mean by this, and let me know in the comments below what you think. Growing up. The first one I'm going to tell is a little bit loose in a sense. I had a player who often plays, and I have a player who often plays barbarian types and fighter types, and another player who plays a variety of characters, but in this particular campaign, they were playing a fighter type. These two became buddies. I think they may have established it ahead of time that they were buddies, but we played several adventures. They proved it by helping each other out, by having great interactions, by exploring together. Then one of the player characters died. Now, these barbarians, they didn't care about anything. They were partiers, they spent all their gold, they did whatever. But once that one fighter died, the other barbarian type character decided we need to do something in memorial of this character. It's important to me to do that. And their idea of just spending gold on random things and not caring about stuff shifted to I'm collecting treasure to build some kind of in the end, they built kind of like a house where they trained fighters, I think. Either way, or maybe a hospital. I can't remember what it ended up being, but they shifted their goals, their desires, their character's mindset changed from I'm a wily barbarian that just risks my life all the time and doesn't care about the gold, I just want the adventure, to I'm going to try to build a legacy. This was a character arc that happened in play. They didn't plan it out ahead of time. It was based on what happened in the game, and it made sense for their character to actually do this. So this totally qualifies, though it might be one of the most basic examples. A leader is born. This next example is, I think, a fantastic one. And the reason why I think it's fantastic is because the player themselves actually noticed it and their character actually talked about it. So it really fulfilled it. And basically, this was in my long-running 5e campaign. One of the players started by playing a bard. They were, again, as our characters, freewheeling. They were this and that. But of course, they were the highest charisma score, so they often became the leader. They often were the ones talking. And because of that, and the player themselves were kind of natural leader, the group kind of, nobody said, this is our leader, but it basically became that. And through the course of 3 years or so, several decisions were made by this player/character that cost the group player characters, and again, that were friends in the group, cost the group, reputation, cost the group several things. And in the end, this character, this player, became more cautious. They became more responsible. And I remember we were near the end of the campaign where they basically said that. There was something going on, and they said, they said their character's name, kind of, they were speaking in third person. They said, in the past would have just said, let's just charge in here and do this, but we've lost this person. This happened to this town because of what we did. This happened here. We need to think this out and strategize. I won't lead the party into a death trap again. They had changed. The player's attitude to how they changed the character changed. The player character changed. They went from the leader because they were the one that stepped up front and was charismatic to the leader that was actually caring and a true leader. And it was awesome to see that happen in a game. And fantastic. Great player, great characters in that campaign, and that's where it came from. Nobody planned it ahead of time. It happened because of things that happened in the campaign, and it made sense in the world. Loss of innocence. So this last one is actually a character that I played. Let me pat myself on the back. No, seriously though, I've played this character in a Call of Cthulhu campaign now for several years. And they started off being young, and this is a pretty common theme, and kind of innocent. They were a dancer, they were kind of a free spirit, and they were very open to the world. They didn't believe, they almost were like bulletproof. As you can think of when you're a teenager, you don't know, you don't feel, you haven't seen enough of the world to know that it's much darker than you think. And in Call of Cthulhu, it's definitely much darker than you think. And at the end of one of the chapters, the character that brought them into the group died. Died based on something they said. Because they realized that we were in this space. I mean, if you played Call of Cthulhu, and there was something very terrible about to happen, and I knew as a player, and I think my character would have known that this other player character is the only person that could have done the thing, and it involved something that was incredibly risky, and they were probably going to die, and that person showed fortitude, bravery, and did it, and their character died. And because we were playing Pulp Cthulhu, that character actually was able to come back in the next chapter, changed, in a dramatic way. And because of that, that became a major thing. My character feared losing their friend. And when the person who helped the friend come back was in serious trouble, she kind of led the group in the direction to help that person. That person helped our friend. That person helped our friend. And she pushed that, and that became a thing. She became almost, from the person who was just kind of with the group and the young person, because she was the youngest one, inexperienced, to taking almost a leadership role because of her loss. And of course, as Call of Cthulhu goes, more and more losses happened, and we'll just leave it at that. But again, I didn't plan it. I had no intention of this character becoming more serious. It happened because of what happened in the game. The player character dying, their friend basically, and it made sense. It made sense that after seeing such horrors that you would change. And you wouldn't just remain the same. I think this is something we can take as players and as dungeon masters when we want to work with our players to craft amazing stories, if you will. Oh no, not stories, but emergent stories, emergent character arcs, characters that change from one place to the other based on what happened in the world. This can be a really fun way to play, and it's not something that's really easy to force in the game and say, this is what we're doing, because the second you do that, you've broken the first rule. So it's something that you just have to recognize, like most emergent play, as it happens, and enjoy it when you get those great moments. I've played maybe too many, never too many, hundreds and hundreds of sessions of role-playing games in the last 5 or 6 years, and only a handful of times has this happened in campaigns or in sessions. And it's really special when it does. So I would love to know what you think. Is this something that's ever happened to you? Do you think this is interesting? What would you do to kind of promote it? Let me know in the comments below. That's always great. Be sure to check the description below. I will put a link to the Cerebrivore podcast. Boy, that's a mouthful. That I was on. So you guys can listen to that if you're interested in Conan. And there's a link down there to my Patreon, also to the Discord if you want to sign up for that kind of stuff. I'll talk to you soon.